Joining me right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline covers the New York Jets for the New York Daily News. Manish Mehta joins me now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. How you doing today?
I'm good, Josh. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Before we get into the Jets, the thing that stuck out to me most when I reached out to you was the fact that, you got a Sixers logo on your Twitter account. You got Trust the Process on your bio there. I got to know, how long have you been a Sixers fan, and what is it like supporting the Sixers when you're working in the New York market?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Knicks aren't any good, so I think there's a lot of frustration for the NBA fan up in New York, and obviously the Nets aren't good. So it hasn't necessarily been well received, but look, I'm a native Philadelphian, born and raised in Philly, been a Sixers fan my entire life, so I'm not going to change that logo until they are bounced from the playoffs. I actually have a bet with another buddy of mine who covers the NFL from Boston, so if they do lose, I will be sporting a Boston Celtics avatar for about a week.
Well, among bets, that's not the worst bet, though, right? Like, it's not like you get cut your hair or anything crazy, you get a tattoo, so at least if you only have to change the logo, it's not too bad.
Yeah, we'll keep it PG. I guess it could be much worse. I was pretty cocky before the series actually started, so I'm glad. I'm glad the bet's only an avatar.
So, what are your thoughts overall on the Sixers this season? Is it something that you've been really excited about? Is it something that you're kind of like, you're trying to be, grounded in your optimism? How do you feel?
Well, look, I think entering the season, I thought it would have been a pretty significant achievement if they made the postseason. I figured that they would be a lower seeded team, maybe 7 or 8. So the fact that they finished the way they did in the regular season, especially without Embiid going on that tear, was a bit surprising. And I think that probably heightened the expectations among the fan base more so than what people thought maybe 2 months ago. So, look, if they do get bounced, I'm not saying that they will, but if they do get bounced in the second round, I don't think it's a failure this season. They're clearly headed in the right direction. They've got a lot of work to do in free agency. They're going to have to bring in some pieces. They're also obviously going to have to cultivate Markelle Fultz's talent a little bit, because the fact that he's a number 1 overall pick sitting on the bench in the postseason is really unacceptable, at least, in this humble fan's opinion.
A balanced, rational fan. And I didn't know people like you existed. All right, so so let's get to the Jets here. So I find it, the Jets, you could say they're probably one of the most lucky teams in the draft. They had their guy fall to them, Sam Darnold. You try to draft the 3. You're hoping you get one of the top 3 quarterbacks, and Sam Darnold falls to them. First, touch on, what was the mood around the Jets when Darnold fall to them? Was it kind of like, is this real? What was the thinking over there?
Well, look, for the longest time, the Jets felt like really many NFL fans thought, which was that Sam Darnold would go number 1 to Cleveland. They were operating under that assumption really for months. So the fact that, they got a pretty good indication the morning of the draft that Baker Mayfield was going to be the guy. And then it's an easy decision. At that point, when you're left with Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, and Josh Allen, for them, I should say, it was an easy decision. I think that Josh Rosen has a terrific future ahead of him as well. But Darnold was ahead of Rosen in their pecking order. So it is funny. You touched on the fact that they were a bit lucky. If you look at the first 4 years of general manager Mike McCagnon's tenure, this is now the 3rd time where a highly coveted prospect has fallen to him. A few years back, Leonard Williams was thought to be, if not the best prospect, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 prospects, and he fell to the Jets at 6. Last year, the same could be said about Jamal Adams. People thought he would be a 2 or 3 overall. He fell to the Jets at 6 as well, and now you get Sam Darnold. So there's something about these blue chip prospects that seem to want to fall into the Jets' lap. But this is what they needed. We'll find out what Sam Darnold is, of course, throughout time. He's a young player. He hasn't even turned 21 yet. He'll be 21 in June. But he's got terrific skill set. And for most teams in the NFL, I believe he was the number 1 quarterback on their board.
I noticed some of your notes, your top 5 observations from Jets rookie minicamp. You talk about how comfortable and confident he is, how he's cool but not aloof, great at throwing on the move, quietly encouraging his teammates. And these are all things that, for those in the Philadelphia area, remember some of the similar descriptions that were made of Carson Wentz. In your mind, are there any parallels between Darnold coming into his rookie minicamp and what people saw from Carson Wentz coming in the Eagles minicamp?
Yeah, I think so. I think the number one similarity is work ethic, frankly. I mean, there's a special kind of mindset that you have to have if you're going to be a successful quarterback in the NFL. There's a lot of guys who have talent. You know, you hear about arm talent all the time. The guy can sling it 60, 70, 80 yards if you're Josh Allen down the field. You hear that routinely. But I think what separates the good quarterbacks from the great quarterbacks at this level is really work ethic, assuming that they have all the measurables physically. And Sam Darnold, by all accounts, everybody I've spoken to that has known him for a good deal of time, says that this guy, lives and breathes football, and he's not going to take any shortcuts. And to be successful, especially at a young age at the quarterback position, you really need to log those hours. That's just not, that's just not talk. It's just not stuff that you want to hear from players when they're talking to the media. You actually want them to grind when there are no cameras, when there is, supposed downtime. You're in the office breaking down film, talking to coaches, trying to get better, trying to learn. And I think that is a makeup that Sam Darnold has. I don't foresee him ever losing that. So that, to me, is probably the number one trait that I think is similar to Carson Wentz. Wentz is a guy who is a tireless worker. When we spoke to veterans on the Eagles during Wentz's rookie season even, they would say how this guy would watch film. It's a story that stood out to me a couple years ago. He would watch film the morning of a game before breakfast, before the team met for breakfast. And I thought that was unusual. I had not really heard of that before. So just the idea that Sam Darnold, I believe, is fully invested in his profession, just like Carson Wentz is fully invested in putting in the effort and the time. Those are things that are important, maybe not talked about too much, but things that really are invaluable when you're trying to grow and develop as a young quarterback in the NFL.
You look at the situation Darnold is coming into, it's not like he's expected that he has to start week one if he's per se not ready. You got Josh McCown there. We know that they signed Teddy Bridgewater to see what he still has to offer. They let go of Bryce Petty, but Christian Hackenberg is still there. So there's a lot of talented arms in that quarterback room.
Yeah, there's no pressure per se to have him be the week one starter. Now, that being said, I think just based on talking to people in the organization that they believe that if Darnold is who they think he is, that he will show enough in training camp and the preseason to be the week one starter. But again, if he's not ready, they're not going to rush him. Josh McCown, in all likelihood, would be the week one starter. Either way, McCown is a terrific mentor for any young quarterback. I don't think Sam Darnold could really have landed in a better situation in that sense. Now, the supporting cast, of course, needs to be upgraded, and that's going to have to happen over the next several years. There aren't really that many dynamic weapons around him. The offensive line is kind of a question mark as well. So you're right. No pressure to start week one when they open up in Detroit on Monday night on September 10th. But I have a sneaking suspicion that he's going to show enough over the next several months in which so that the coaching staff feels comfortable enough to make him the starter in week one.
Speaking of the coaching staff, new offensive coordinator now is Jeremy Bates. Talk about how you expect this team offensively to look different with Bates in charge.
Well, look, Bates did a lot of behind-the-scenes work with the former offensive coordinator John Morton last year in terms of game planning. Now, obviously, in-game changes and overall philosophy fell on Morton. But you're going to see a similar offense that you saw with Denver under Mike Shanahan. And when you look at Mike Shanahan's staff back then when they were winning Super Bowls and really among the best teams in the AFC, there's an overlap in the coaching staff. Rick Dennison, who was one of Shanahan's top assistants, is now the run game coordinator and offensive line coach for Jeremy Bates. The wide receivers coach, Carl Durrell, was also on that staff in Denver. You're going to see a lot of similar elements. You'll see some stuff that John Gruden did with Tampa in Bates' scheme, and those are the influences in his career, Shanahan and Gruden. I think it'll be a creative offense. Jeremy Bates hasn't been an offensive coordinator in several years. The last time was in Seattle for a year. And then prior to that, Shanahan actually gave him an opportunity at a very young age in Denver to call plays. But he's got a terrific football mind. I think he's fully invested in making Sam Darnold the best player he can be as quickly as possible without really unnecessarily rushing his development. So I think he's got enough good ideas to make this Jet offense competitive in 2018.
We're talking with Manish Mehta here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. You can follow him on Twitter at MMetaNYDN. Covers the New York Jets for the New York Daily News. Also a hardcore fan of the Sixers that you see trust the process all over his Twitter account there. You look at the defense for the Jets. I know Todd Bowles comes from a defensive background. I think that's why people should not be surprised at the development of the defense last year. What kind of steps forward do you think the Jets can make on defense in 2018?
Well, you've got their rookie safeties from a year ago, Jamal Adams and Marcus May, had a little bit more experience, and they showed plenty of promise in their first season. I think they're going to be the anchor for the back end. They upgraded at the cornerback position. They also brought back Morris Claiborne, who's now a number 2 instead of being the number 1. The defensive line is really an interesting part of this team because Leonard Williams is their best defensive lineman. His sack production really wasn't anywhere close to what you wanted last year, yet he constantly created pressure and got quarterbacks off their spots. He's among the league leaders in quarterback hurries and quarterback hits. I just think he needs to, a little bit of help on that defensive line to help him get home a little bit more. He's getting, some double teams, probably in an inordinate amount for what Todd Bowles would like. So it's a growing defense. I think this defense will keep them in games as Sam Darnold kind of grows with this offense. So, this is going to be a defensive-oriented team, and that's not going to be a surprise. As you said, that's what Todd Bowles' background is. But I really think that the anchors for this defense are their 2 safeties, Marcus May and Jamal Adams. And if they just take that next step in their evolution, that'll help a long way to help this Jet team as a whole be more competitive than they were last year.
One of the other interesting things about the Jets is the additions of guys Isaiah Crowell and Thomas Rawls to the running back tandem. How do you think they're going to use the running backs this year? Because, Bilal Powell was a guy who got used a lot last year. We know Crowell is a guy who can be a hard runner, and Rawls, when he's healthy, can be dynamic.
Yeah, Rawls to me it was an interesting late free agent signing. They got him on the cheap. You're right. Look, he showed some promise as a rookie in Seattle, and then he's really been hit with that injury bug. Wasn't fully recovered from everything I understand last year, but he hits the hole hard. His vision is probably not among the best in the league. I think it's got pedestrian vision, but he really hits the hole hard. He's a hard runner. If he can stay healthy, maybe he can contribute. Isaiah Crowell is really going to be their outside zone runner. They're going to have an outside zone running scheme under Rick Dennison, again, much like you saw in Denver's heyday with Shanahan. So, to me, is he an upgrade from a year ago when Matt Forte was running on fumes? Yes, he clearly is an upgrade. But I just think they need another piece, another playmaker in the backfield. They're not going to get that this year, of course, but maybe they can address that next year. You mentioned Bilal Powell. He's in the final year of his contract. He's a pretty good player. He's not a dynamic weapon, but we'll see how he fits in with these other running backs. I really think that Bates is going to give all of these guys an opportunity to find their niche and to see if they can carve out a role. What I will say is there is an undrafted rookie fullback out of Oklahoma, Dimitri Flowers, who they obviously just signed after the draft. Keep an eye on him. I think they're going to use him in a versatile way. In Oklahoma, he was a short yardage runner, but he was also really a nice pass-catching weapon for Baker Mayfield. They kind of moved him around. He even played tailback one game. He's a Swiss Army knife type of player. And a year ago, the Jets tried to get Kyle Juszczyk when he hit free agency. He was a tight end at Harvard. Then he went to all came down to the Jets and the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, who also runs a very similar system to what Jeremy Bates is going to run with the Jets. He's the guy who got Juszczyk. So I think you're going to see the Jets kind of use Flowers, assuming he makes the roster, in a variety of ways. And again, he's a sneaky guy that's not going to be talked about too much, but I think he could find a nice little role in Jeremy Bates' offense.
One more question before I let you go, and I appreciate the time here on a Saturday here on 97.3 ESPN. Mike Maccagnan, what is your perspective on him? Because he's now the third GM to come into the New York Jets over the last several years. We mentioned earlier that some of these picks have kind of fell to him, Darnold, Adams, Williams. Overall, what is your assessment of him as a general manager?
Well, look, he's a lifelong scout, and you're right, he's got some good fortune in having some of these top-end guys fall to him. Now, what I will say is that you do have to give him credit for Leonard Williams, because at that point in time, the Jets' strength was their defensive line with Sheldon Richardson and Mo Wilkerson. That wasn't a position that the Jets necessarily needed, but he took the best player available, and that's worked out because now the last man standing among that group on the defensive line is Leonard Williams. Look, I think that Maccagnan has had a spotty draft record. It's uneven. second-round picks other than Marcus May really haven't worked out. He's made some quality, low-risk, high-reward trades in his tenure, things that aren't going to blow you away, but in the short term kind of worked out with Brandon Marshall, Ryan Fitzpatrick for late-round picks. His big free agent signings haven't worked out. Darrelle Revis didn't work out. Wilkerson didn't work out. We'll see if the cornerback that they just signed to a big deal, we'll see if he works out. But look, it's uneven, and the Jets have been 10-6, 5-11, and 5-11 under his tenure. So if you're going to be honest and objective about it, I think that mediocre is probably the best way to put it, because the Jets' results in these first 3 years have reflected really one good year and two subpar seasons.
You can follow him on Twitter at MMetaNYDN. He covers the New York Jets for the New York Daily News. Manish Mehta joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. I hope for your sake the Sixers do win this series so you don't have to get stuck with the Celtics logo on your Twitter there.
Well, they're definitely going to win tonight. You can book that.
Take it to the bank. There you go. Appreciate the time today.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Take care.